I only want to talk about A through F, if you can address this to parents, because in talking to parents, the thought process is this was designed to make it clear and easy for them to see how their schools are doing. What they're telling us is it's not clear because they have schools where, say their kid was in a C school and they think they're doing better, they've seen improvement since the tweak. Now their C school's an F. And they have their superintendent and their principal telling them your numbers are flawed. Superintendent in the next district saying your numbers are flawed. You say they're not. They say this helps me zero. I am as confused as I've ever been. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I do think it's unfortunate that we have educators giving mixed and sometimes incorrect messages about the nature of these ratings. If a school this year has a C rating and the year before that it had a D rating, we should celebrate that improvement. That's why we use that. And that should give information to the family that the school's performance has gotten better. And the reverse is also true. However, I think for the purposes of today's announcement, the caveat that I give is that this announcement today is not all that beneficial to families because what we are telling them is how the school performed in 2023. And the reason for that is because about 100 school systems sued us. Their legal arguments were flawed. They lost, but they effectively won by delaying the issuance of the ratings for so long. So so to those families, I would say, when ratings are issued this fall in August, you can use that to evaluate the performance of your campus. You can look at this year's ratings compared to last year's ratings, and you can very easily tell, is it school getting better, is it staying the same, or is it getting worse?
But to the question of do the tweaks, and I know you've explained they happen every, I think, 5 years. Do the tweaks confuse things? I know you say they're necessary, but is it worth it?
So prior to 2017, the state changed the rating methodology for schools every single year. And if you change rating methodology, it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison anymore. But what that meant was that literally every year for 30 years in Texas, when you looked at the ratings of a school this year and you compared it to the ratings of a school last year, it wouldn't be a perfect year-over-year comparison. So when the legislature changed the A through F system in 2017, it said, this is what we're going to do instead. We'll hold it steady for about 5 years, and then once every 5th year, we'll update it. When we do that once every 5th year rating, we rerun everybody's ratings the year before. So in the year of the transition, you still have an apples to apples comparison. So if a parent wants to know whether their school got better in 2023 versus 2022, log into our website and you can see this year's ratings and last year's ratings using the new methodology, and anything you hear about a tweak is irrelevant. You have a very simple way of telling whether or not the school got better, stayed the same, or got worse.
Commissioner, what are your thoughts on the pieces of legislation inspired by the lawsuits that would make it harder for school districts to do this again?
Yeah, well, I've seen some legislation move forward. Some of that legislation makes it much clearer in terms of the methodology that is used in the A through F. So whoever happens to be the Commissioner of Education, they're directed with great clarity, do it this way. That'll be useful for schools and whoever happens to be Commissioner of Education, so we're all on the same page. That legislation, I think, also includes proposals that do restrict school districts' legal options. One thing to bear in mind is school districts have the right to appeal their ratings today. They have had that under current law. They also have the right to file what's referred to as a rule challenge, an administrative rule challenge, and they have always had that right. The school districts that chose to sue the agency did not use either of those two processes. What they did was, one day before ratings were issued, when everyone knew the ratings were going to be issued, they went to a Travis County judge courthouse and asked for an emergency injunction. The legal standard, for those of you who aren't lawyers, is actually not all that high to get an emergency injunction, so it was granted. Then roughly a 2-month procedural delay for the court case to actually hear whether the argument was heard, and then another 2 years of appeals thereafter. So I think what the legislature is trying to figure out is there a way that we can ensure that parents have access to this information and that they're not denied access to this information by people using taxpayer funds to prevent A through F ratings from being issued in the courts.
I think the concern superintendents have about this legislation is that it makes whoever the commissioner is kind of all-powerful over certain decisions. Since you're the person in that seat now, do you feel like that's a valid way to feel?
Yeah, I think that that's a talking point that I would use if I were in their shoes, but has no basis in reality. I report to the governor as commissioner, and whoever the commissioner is reports to whoever the governor is, and the governor is elected by 30 million Texans. In addition, the entire funding of the Texas Education Agency and all the laws that whoever the Commissioner of Education is required to follow are set by the legislature. So going back to Federalist Papers, the founders of this country were quite wise, and there are 3 different branches of government with 3 different sets of checks and balances. And what unfortunately is happening in the status quo is school districts are using taxpayer funds to get one branch of government to overrule the other 2 branches of government indefinitely in a way that denies parents access to information about how their kids' schools are working. So this ultimately harms students, and we have a strong amount of evidence that the fact that this lawsuit has gone on for 2 years has actually caused reduced learning in math and reduced learning in reading. So I would love for those lawsuits to stop.
Commissioner, I was curious, for a lot of new parents that are here in Texas, why is this such an important program, this A through F? And, you know, for parents who see an F by a school, that might be very scary for them. So what's your message to them about that?
Well, the public policy of the state of Texas is to make sure that parents are in the driver's seats with regard to their education. Kids are the kids of those families. It's their parents first and foremost. So I'm not just Commissioner of Education. I'm a dad. I have 4 young kids, and so I want to know what schools are that I have access to, how well those schools are performing. I want to use that information to make sure that I make the best decision for my kids, and I want to use that information to help my schools get better. And so we provide this as a tool for families so they know exactly what the performance level of that school is, and then they can make informed decisions. It is true that there are children that are getting a phenomenal education at schools that are otherwise rated F. It's also true that the majority of children at those schools are not getting a good education at all. And so we want to make sure that families have that information so they can then make a decision that's in the best interest of their families.
You said on the Zoom that by issuing performance ratings for schools, students in higher ranked schools subsequently did better with higher attendance and higher graduation rates. What about morale in schools that are not A, B through F?
Yeah, I mean, if it is my job to deliver education to children, and I'm working in a school where the majority of children are not receiving a quality education, then I have to figure out how I change what I do as an adult and how we change what we do as an adult. It's children are the greatest resource that we have in this state. They belong to parents, and parents entrust them to their schools, and this is a partnership between schools and their families. But the children themselves they don't run those schools. They rely upon the adults that are in their lives that are at those schools to be the best versions of themselves. And the reason that we evaluate performance is so we can reflect on how well we are working as adults today. We will not live in a utopia. Nothing will ever be perfect. But it is incumbent upon us to try to be the best version of ourselves for our children. They're counting on us.
Commissioner Morath, you're a numbers guy. What percentage of schools went up in rating to the B or the A group, and what percentage went below that?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
So, like, roughly,
I mean,
how much of a decrease did school districts see in their letter grade ratings?
well, we did see on average between, now, mind you, we're traveling back in time, because the ratings that we are issuing was for 2 years ago. So from 2022 to 2023, we did see a noticeable decline in the performance of schools. And what that was based on is we saw the rate at which we grew children academically, their year-over-year academic growth. It was very high in 2022, and it was not nearly as high in 2023. What people should understand about the A through F system is it is an extremely fair system. We do not just evaluate a school based upon the number of kids who pass a test. We actually look at how well that student grew from last year to this year academically. And we give the schools the better of those two ratings. What happened between 2022 and 2023 is the number of kids broadly passing stayed about the same, but the rate with which we were growing kids declined materially.
So if you see basically an across-the-board decrease in the same year that there were some tweaks, right, to the rating system, is that not cause to maybe reevaluate the rating system, right? It would be different if there was a few schools.
Sure, I think that is a phenomenal suggestion, and we've done it. We made probably 20 different modifications in the design of A through F in 2022 and in 2023 before the ratings were finalized, based upon feedback that we got from educators. So I regularly engage with parents and with teachers and principals and superintendents and school board members. So this system was modified based upon their feedback. We also used the new methodology with all the same data the year before. So we could make sure that there's nothing different in the methodology that's causing any kind of problems. And so we know that with a high degree of confidence.
You further tweaked after the 22-23 tweak?
Yes, what none of the school districts may have told you is one of the reasons why the rating methodology was delayed a little bit in 23 is we lowered the expected cut score for growth rates because we saw growth rates so much lower in 23 than they were in 22. That is not the reason why anyone from a school district has sued me, because generally people are fine if their ratings go up. The objection is not to the ratings. The objection is to what the rating says.
And kind of going back to what I first said, going back to parents who say, I had a dad tell me, and I relate to this with my own child. My child I have not gotten any data for them between the pandemic and the lawsuit for 6 years. That's the entire time they were in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And my child's matriculated on. And so I've done without it. And quite frankly, at this point, I don't care anymore. Do you feel that all of this has shaken the confidence in A through F? When it first came out, parents were really excited to have this letter grade. Now they seem to be like, eh.
Yeah, so two things. As a dad, I get kids in public school. I get my kids' individual academic performance reports.
Right.
And part of those academic reports include STAR test results, which I find very useful because it's a way to compare what the state's expectation for grade level proficiency is versus what my kid's report card says, and they may not be grading on the same standards. A through F is how the school did as a whole. So as a dad, I deeply care about how my child did. I also want to know how well the school is working, and so that I can get better. And unfortunately, due to lawsuits filed by about 100 school systems using your money, dads and moms for the last 2 years have been denied access to this information.
With the ESA bill heading to the governor's desk, do you think that there's a place for private schools within an A through F system in Texas?
There are other states that have explored that as a policy option. What I am aware of in terms of the bill is the legislature was very intentional about making sure that parents had direct information about their kids' performance, and so parents will get a reliable indicator, sort of assessment report from their own kids within that program. And I think that that's consistent with the way that these programs work in a number of other states too.
Let me ask you about the STAR test. We've heard a lot of politicians talk about it. I think the governor has even mentioned he wants to do away with it. What's the status of that?
Well, the STAR test is the law of the land, and we administer it every year. It's also a little bit of a misnomer to say the STAR test. I hear people sometimes say it's all about one test on one day. That's not factually correct. So there's reading and math and science and social studies. It's grades 3 through about grades 10. So there's a lot of different indicators. So it's a test designed to test the state's curriculum standards, so what the state expects every third grader to have mastered in math. Do you know your times tables, for example? And then that information is provided to parents and it's provided to educators so that they can adjust accordingly.
Speaking
So
of
there's
the
nothing new, though, that's been filed, legislation?
There's legislation currently under consideration that would create some replacement for the STAR test, and so I'm a constitutionally sworn officer. I do whatever the legislature tells me.
slight jog to the left or right, with the attempt to dismantle the National Department of Education. Some responsibility will likely fall to the TEA. How prepared is Texas to take on whatever responsibilities the state may now have to be responsible for?
Yeah, my role is focused on the 5.5 million souls in Texas public schools, so I've been pretty laser focused on that and remain focused on that. We adjust if changes are necessary out of Washington, but I spend most of my time and attention here on the issues related to schools in Texas. I do think it is useful because there's obviously a media in the room. There's a lot of media coverage on this topic. The concept of the existence of the Department of Education is not the same as the concept of federal funding support for public education. There are 4 primary federal funding flows that come to Texas public schools. The largest is not even administered by the Department of Education. It's administered by the Department of Agriculture, and it's for school lunch program. The other 3, one for special education, one for vocational education, and one for low-income students, those funding streams actually predate the existence of the Federal Department of Education. So they were previously administered by different federal departments. So I think there's a lot of different ways that the federal government may decide to organize what it does. We'll pay attention to what Congress enacts and follow the laws of the land.
Commissioner, there's also a lawsuit for the 2024 ratings. Any trends you saw there? I know you can't release the data, but what were the trends from the 2024 ratings? If 2023 was down, what did 2024?
Yeah, we have published all the sort of STAR scores of the graduation rates, the college career military attainment. What we generally saw is college career military attainment rates for schools continued to rise. Graduation rates were about the same. Grade level proficiency in reading was about the same. I think grade level proficiency in math was maybe a little bit down. So there's a lot of different indicators that go into A through F ratings, but that kind of gives you a sense of how they may shake out.
So my follow-up question there, if 23 is down, 24 is down, minus that one college career military readiness area, like what role does the TEA play in trying to help districts as a whole? Because I feel like if there's a trend statewide, what steps are being taken now to help these districts get back on track? It's one thing if there are a few outliers, but if this is a consistent trend across a couple of years, what measures, what steps, what programs are you guys working on now?
Yeah. Well, one tool to actually help improvement for students in schools is in fact the A through F system. It's a continuous improvement tool, and it has been shown to help improve student performance in schools over time. So hopefully the lawsuits end and this becomes a tool to support school improvement around the state. When your broader question, it's really both about what TEA does, and we're the executive arm of the legislature, so what the legislature does. So as an example of a statewide support, the state has invested pretty heavily in ensuring that teachers have access to really well-developed, high-quality instructional materials vetted by the State Board of Education, and that the additional financial resources are available to schools for them to adopt. So that is now a new support that is available for every school in the state of Texas. We have some preliminary evidence that would lead us to conclude that that's really helping kids and helping teachers. So we're excited to see how that unfolds. But of course, those are all optional resources. Districts have to choose to want to use them. Just
one more question from me, and then I'll defer to all my colleagues out here. But for people who are watching this and they say, okay, the 2023 A through F letter grades, districts, more than 100 suits, several of them here in North Texas, you know the area well, and the scores are down. Consequently, in the same environment in which the governor's very vocal, his academic priority for kids in Texas is school vouchers, right? Is there any correlation whatsoever? I just want to get your answer on the record.
No. The governor had many conversations with them. The governor is interested in better lives for Texas students, period. And frankly, that's my only focus as well. A through F is a very useful tool to help public schools improve. And the legislature is entertaining other options. The governor has other supports to help families so that students can improve broadly.
I want to ask you about school funding. The House has passed legislation that would give up to $9 billion in new money for school districts and teacher pay raises. I just wanted to get your reaction to that and how.
I mean, I'm the Commissioner of Education. I always like it when schools have access to more resources. I do think, as a policymaker, former school board member in Dallas, you always have to balance the needs of taxpayers. You want to make sure taxpayers retain as much of their hard-earned money as humanly possible. And then we support schools with targeted investments that help improve student outcomes. And so I know that this is what guides members of the legislature. K through 12 education is the #1 priority of the Texas legislature. It has been for the last 20 years. It's the largest individual sort of component of spending. I think we spend about $85 billion a year on K-12 education in the state of Texas. So it's a huge area of focus.
But do you think it'll go a long way as far as, you've heard from school districts over the years about the lack of new funding. And
Yeah, so much of this becomes how you spend it. If you give people new resources and they're spent in an evidence-based way, in a way that is designed to improve outcomes for students, then that's great. If you give people resources and it gets spent on items that do not necessarily improve student learning, then it becomes less impactful. So a lot of that then becomes up to districts and how school systems around the state prioritize and then run their schools.
Commissioner, we know that public schools are losing enrollment and projected to continue to do so. Do you have any expectations for how an ESA bill will affect that trend?
So public schools writ large are not losing enrollment. They lost enrollment during COVID, but they have largely recovered, and I would say it's a very small increase in enrollment statewide. But there are 1,200 school systems, so you can see an individual school system that might be gaining 5,000 kids, another school system that loses. So it's a little different in local communities. But sort of statewide, it's not that we're seeing declines. It's sort of we're seeing growth, enrollment growth stop. So an individual district that has a factory open up in town, that has an influx of enrollment, has to hire more people, has to get desks, all the things that they need to do. An individual district that has a factory close has to make adjustments similarly. So those kind of operational adjustments are adjustments that schools have been making for 100 years in Texas and will continue to make.
To jump back on the school funding, do you think the increase to the basic allotment is sufficient given the levels of inflation? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question that does not actually have an answer. The idea of what amount of money is enough is not an answerable question. It's not an answerable question for my 11-year-old. It's not an answerable question for any adult. It's not an answerable question in any enterprise. And the reason I know this is because this has been rigorously studied by the legislature. There was a 1.5 year long school finance commission that met several years ago, and there is no known answer to that question. So it's that. So to me, the issue is: are we making investments in targeted ways that seem to be likely to bear fruit for our kids? And for that, you see legislative proposals that are, I think, really trying to attack that question.
I think one of those is TIA, which you obviously support, but we still haven't seen, go fully to scale, even though that's where a lot of the money will be targeted. How do you, from a state perspective, ensure that money is being used?
Yeah, so you talked about the teacher incentive allotment. This is a really unique thing for the state of Texas. The state of Texas has a funding mechanism that's an entitlement funding mechanism in the school finance system that will give somewhere between $3,000 and $32,000 per year per teacher based upon the performance of those teachers. So it really sets teachers up to make 6-figure salaries over the course of their careers. At this point, I think we're at north of 500 to 600 school systems that have opted into the teacher incentive allotment. Just a couple of years ago, that was only 200. So it is really spreading like wildfire. It's wildly popular. Teachers certainly appreciate this huge increase in compensation that comes from delivering great instruction. So that is necessary, not sufficient. There are other things that I think we also need to have on the table, and I think that's the reason why you see a bunch of different policy proposals and funding invested in a bunch of different buckets by the legislature.
Commissioner, almost every major school district in North
You
Texas.
said you weren't going to ask
I
anything.
know, but every time you be setting me up. Okay,
Yeah.
so almost every major district in North Texas has a deficit. Even ones in wealthy communities, suburban, urban, you name it. And this has started to happen in just the last 2 or 3 years, right? So while I can appreciate what you're talking about with spending money in an evidence-based way, it's rampant here in North Texas, nearly every district. And not every district is mismanaging money, right? So
Yeah, so this gets back to your question. If you see a broader trend, is there some other broader cause?
Correct.
And then is there some statewide? So we're relatively certain we know what the cause is. The federal government gave our state, and really every state, for about 4 years, an extra $1,000 per kid on top of everything else as part of the COVID response. That money dried up about 6 months ago. And as a result, districts had that in their budget before, and they don't anymore. And they have to then downsize because that was one-time money that came from the feds. Everyone knew it was one-time money. And if you spend one-time money on personnel or other recurring costs, you will have to make adjustments for it. So even though the state has increased funding for public education during that same time period, which was not universally covered with accuracy, I don't mean to be super critical, but there was about $2 billion per year of new money that the legislature put into the school finance system over the last 2 years. So it was actually an increase in funding from the state. At the same time, a very significant decrease in funding from the federal government. And so we have school systems, our superintendents, CFOs, school boards that are dealing with that reality. It is a reality that folks have to deal with right now.
also though, the explosion of special education though. How much more of a burden is that for public school districts in Texas?
Yeah, so there was a Special Education School Finance Commission that looked at this question. So as special education rates increase, schools receive more money because of that automatically. That's the way the state's investment in special education works. But the legislature is also entertaining a pretty significant increase in special education funding above and beyond that even now. So those legislative proposals are still working their way through the process.
I wanted to ask you about uncertified teachers. How confident are you that the legislature is going to address that this year to help school districts or require school districts to actually make sure those teachers are certified within a certain period of time?
So you're asking me to predict the future of legislative deliberations,
I just asked your confidence
which is
level,
a very difficult question to answer. I do know that there are legislative proposals designed to address this challenge now. They are being debated by the legislature, and I, like you, will watch throughout the process and see what emerges.
But it's an important issue, right? As far as like, I think some of the agency's own records show like 56% of the new teachers that were hired, I think last year, were
Yeah.
uncertified.
Yeah, there's been an explosion in first-time teacher hiring where the teachers themselves did not go through any kind of training program. While the idea of certification can be debated, the concept of training for people who work in the classroom is pretty important. If we think about what a brain surgeon does after 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, and residency, they walk into the surgical arena. They have to cleanse their body of impurities because years and years of behavior have made that automatic. They think about what a recent practice that they read about, the lasers, the scalpels they're going to use, and they walk into the operating room, and there's one brain that they are responsible to mold, and that brain is very much asleep on the table. Our teachers, when they walk into the operating room, there are 20 brains that they are responsible for to mold, and there's no anesthesia. They're getting active feedback during that surgical operation. So I think it is incumbent upon us to invest heavily in our teachers, not just their compensation, but also to make sure that they are prepared and trained to give kids the absolute best.
Is that a 5-minute warning? Just 5-minute warning?
On the Uncertified, it looks like some of the priority bills, one would kind of gradually phase out what courses uncertified teachers could teach in the lower foundational grades. Do you think that there is enough supply to meet that demand? Like, do you think Texas is gonna bulk up its pipeline in time? And to do that, like what
Yeah.
do y'all need?
Yeah, I mean, these are, I think, good economic questions. And how do you increase, how do you get supply and demand to match? A part of that happens with compensation. So if a first-time teacher can get hired, and if they are certified, they make $61,000. And if they are uncertified, they make $61,000. Why would I pay the money to go through a certification process? So that's some factor at play. There's also the issue of the cost of the certification, and can we invest more significantly in funding that preparation experience for the teachers. There are various legislative proposals that are doing that. There are districts that are doing this already on their own. Here in the Dallas area, in the North Texas area, you've got a lot of districts that are spending part of their budget on preparing incoming teachers, which is a very wise use of funds to make sure, again, our obligation, we want to make sure that we're giving kids the absolute best. You only get one shot at first grade. So how do we make sure your first grade teacher is as skilled as possible before the school year starts?
On the other end of that, my son is in kindergarten. His teacher posted a picture. She was at an ice cream shop, a senior in high school, that she also taught kindergarten to. What do you tell teachers who feel pretty beat down in the current environment, who do have 15 and 20 years of experience, about why they should stay and not retire at this point?
Yeah, I mean, teaching is the most important profession in America. And it is incumbent upon us to honor them and support them professionally. There are a lot of difficulties associated with it. What are the compensation scales designed in districts to give meaningful pay raises to teachers over time? How are districts organizing the job duties of teachers so that they're not overburdened with 60 or 70-hour work weeks? So these are challenges for which there are known solutions, but they take thoughtful implementation choices. I would say to the teacher you mentioned, tell her thank you for me, and for all of our teachers. We are blessed. We've got an army of angels that work for us in classrooms all over the state of Texas, and we are blessed to have them.
School security, Wilmer Hutchins High School specifically. I wanted to ask you, this was, I guess, a door had been opened to allow the student in. How does Dallas ISD do on its surprise inspections? And have there been issues at the school that you're aware of as far as this kind of thing happening?
Yeah, I think the specifics of that are something I couldn't comment on. It's an ongoing investigation. Broadly, we have teams that work with school districts to conduct self-assessments, to conduct third-party security audits that identify practices that can be improved, and then support the implementation of those improvements. And so Dallas has been getting better, like a number of other states, with that support and with their own focused attention. But as you point out, it is something that we have to be very sensitive to. Our first obligation is to keep our kids safe.
Those security audits are private and confidential. They aren't discussed publicly at board meetings. We can't PIR them. So how should families feel confident that it's being addressed?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think families have every right to ask the district what steps are they taking. Districts can disclose any number of things that they choose to do, but different districts will make different operational choices there. I know, my former life as a school board member, I would want to make sure that parents have all the information I can possibly give them to understand the efforts that we were doing to make kids stay safe in our schools. But I also would want to make sure that very specific security protocols that would be sort of create an operational compromise were not known. And I think each district has to figure out and where that line is, and then share with their families appropriately.
Got time for a couple more. If anybody has maybe one last question.
What can you do as the education commissioner to ensure that vouchers don't hurt the public education system here in Texas?
Well, they come from a different funding bucket. I don't see how that will happen. It's like, this is a known thing. Texas is not unique in this space. Other states around the country have already done this. Other states around the country have vibrant public education systems. The legislature is also simultaneously entertaining, as you said, a $9 billion increase in funding in public education. So I don't see where these things conflict.
And just